safety. I'm Joe Sanak, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice you absolutely love. We want both sides of that. We want you to be thriving, doing well, doing the mindset, the operations, looking at your beliefs and what drives you. But we also want to make sure that we do the side of it where you're just having fun. You're like, I can't believe I get to do this. I can't believe this is my life, this is my business, and this is my impact on the world. So we want all of it, and that's why we bring in different guests 3 times a week to just talk about all sorts of different things that apply to private practice. I'm so excited to have Nir Eyal with me today. Nir is an author, behavioral designer, and researcher whose work explores how beliefs, habits, and environments shape human behavior. He's the author of Beyond Belief, which comes out next week, which examines how deeply held beliefs, often unconscious, drive our actions, limit change, and shape everything from productivity to identity. Known previously for his books Hooked and Indistractable, Nir's latest work represents a shift from managing behavior on the surface to interrogating the belief system underneath it. His research and teaching helps professionals understand why insight alone rarely leads to change and how challenging unexamined beliefs can unlock more meaningful, lasting transformation. Sounds like stuff we love in the therapy world. Nir, welcome to the Practice podcast.
Thank you so much, Joe. Great to be with you.
Yeah, well, Beyond Belief, I feel like it's a very timely book because right now in the world, whether it's politically or what we believe about celery juice or whatever, so many beliefs are just like entrenched and everyone's putting down their, they're kind of laying their boundaries. Why Beyond Belief right now?
So for me, it was a professional need in that I wrote my previous book, Indistractable, and I kept getting these calls that perplexed me. People would call me. I do these hour-long open office hours where anybody can call me and ask me any question if they've read one of my books. And every once in a while, Joe, I would get this call that sounded something like this. And wasn't every call, but maybe 1 in 20 calls would sound like this. Somebody would call me up, and they would sometimes wait months, by the way, to get on my calendar. I only do 1 hour a week. It's all I can afford. But that's what I give free. Anybody can call. So sometimes they have to wait a while. And I get this call that sounded like this. Hey, I read your book. I really liked it. Very helpful, except for the fact that it didn't really work. And I'd say, well, that's interesting. I spent 5 years writing this book. It changed my life. It helped me
Great
overcome
job, author. It
distraction.
doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly, right. And they would ask me this question. It doesn't work. So I would say, I'm super interested. Like, tell me what didn't work. I put a lot of work into it. There's 30 pages of citations to peer-reviewed studies. Like, I really did my homework on this one. How did step one go? Let's start with step one. How did that go? Nir, you know what? I didn't do step one. I didn't do that one. Okay, no problem. I'd say I understand. Maybe you skipped step one. Let's jump to step two. How did step two go for you? I didn't. I read it. I definitely read it, but I didn't do any of it. And I was really perplexed here. What the heck is going on here? Like, what these people would wait for months to get me on the phone to tell me that the author whose book they read and didn't implement didn't do a good job because the book didn't work for them. And I was really frustrated by this. And then I took a step back and I said, wait a minute. I do this. I do this all the time. I've got bookshelves full of books that I haven't put into practice. I've talked to gurus and experts and listened to everybody who's given me wonderful advice that I haven't implemented. Why? What is going on? Why is it that despite knowing what to do, and today we know better than ever what to do, right? If you don't know what to do, you Google it, you ask ChatGPT, the answers are all out there. We are drowning in information. So why is it that despite knowing what to do, and even wanting the benefit of I want to do it, why don't we do it? What's going on here? What's the deeper reason? And I discovered that motivation, as you well know, is not a straight line. That it doesn't matter if you know exactly what to do, the behavior, and you want the benefit, even though classical economics tells us that's the way it works, right? You pay a salary, you do the job description, something's missing. And the thing that's missing is that motivation is not a straight line. Motivation is more like a triangle. You have the behavior, the thing you want to do, the thing that you need to do in order to gain the benefit, right? But that at the base of that triangle is belief. And if you don't have that belief in trusting that I will get that benefit, or what's more often the case, you have a limiting belief around your ability to do the behavior, guess what? No behavior occurs. And so that's really what I wanted to explore. Why is it that despite knowing what to do, it's so often so difficult to actually do it? And what I believe is that at the core of all that are beliefs.
Yeah, I can't wait to dig into some of that. Those of you that are listening and want to hear the other interview that I did with Kier, I'm sorry, Near. I had a friend named Kier. Near. That's episode 1073. So you can always go back to that and check that out either on the website or on the podcast. So people weren't implementing it. You're kind of digging into the beliefs. What did you discover that maybe is obvious to us? And also, what did you discover in this process that maybe are old ways of thinking that are not maybe how we should still be thinking about beliefs?
Yeah, so many surprises in this book. One of the things that was surprising to me is what happens when beliefs change. And so there's a classic study that really blew my mind. It was new to me, and it's a study from the 1950s that we can't do anymore. It would be considered pretty unethical today. But this is the Kurt Richter study. So perhaps you've heard it. I wasn't familiar with it, at least not in the intricacies of it, where Richter took these rats, wild rats, and he put them into a cylinder of water that was about halfway full, and he measured with a stopwatch how long these rats could swim for until they gave up and were exhausted and died. And it turns out a stressed wild rat, in case you were wondering, maybe it comes up in a trivia question, 15 minutes. That's how long a stressed wild rat will survive in a cylinder paddling for its life, about 15 minutes. Great. Okay. Richter noted that down. Then he did a variation of the experiment. He took new wild rats, put them in a cylinder, and he knew that they were going to give up at around 15 minutes. But right before they would give up, he would reach down, pull out the wild rat, dry it off, let the rat catch its breath, and plunk, back in the water it went. And now he did this a few times. And it turned out that the conditioned rats swam longer. That's not a surprise. They were conditioned to expect something else to happen. The cylinder didn't change. The body didn't certainly change of the rats. Nothing physically changed. But something had apparently changed in their mind. Now, have you heard this study before?
I haven't. No.
Oh, amazing. Perfect.
I'm on the edge of my seat. What happens with the rats?
How much longer does the conditioned rat who's been pulled out of the cylinder swim for? Take a guess, Joe.
So, just having gone to a behavioral psychology program and done rat training, typically we found that each time there's an intervention, it would double or even more. So,
Yeah.
so I would guess if we're at the 14-minute mark and we pull out the rat, it's at least going to be till 30 minutes to maybe even 60 minutes.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be incredible if there was an intervention where something had happened in the rat's experience and they had been conditioned to persevere longer, 4 times longer? Wouldn't that be incredible? I mean, think about for us, the last time you were working on something very difficult and you felt exhausted, right? You were exercising and you said, okay, that's it. I quit. I can't do anymore. You pushed yourself to the absolute limit. If I could give you an intervention that quadrupled that time, that'd be incredible. That'd be a miracle. Here's what happened, Joe. Those rats didn't swim for 60 minutes. They swam for 60 hours. 60 hours, 240 times longer. Once they had this new belief, we can't ask the rats, obviously, what they were believing, but we controlled the variables and knew that it wasn't the cylinder, it wasn't the bodies. Something had happened in their minds that they had now had this expectation that salvation might be possible if they persisted. And so that, to me, unlocked something. Because I started thinking about it in my own life. How many things do I know that I don't implement? Or even if I do implement, I give up after, the metaphorical 15 minutes versus, wow, I could have kept going for 60 hours. And so there's nothing wrong with quitting per se, but quitting before it's time, quitting before where persistence could have made a difference, that's very sad. That's a loss of human potential. And so to understand that, you asked what surprised me, that kind of kicked off my exploration. But then when I started digging into this incredible power of belief, what can belief do for us? I realized that there was kind of 3 big buckets, 3 levers that we can use to use beliefs that can change our motivation levels, because beliefs fundamentally alter what we see, we call this attention, what we feel, we call this anticipation, and what we do, we call this agency. So see, feel, do. And once you understand these three powers of belief, you can really unlock, I think, some incredible phenomenon. So, you asked for other things that surprised me. Oh my God, the new research around the placebo effect. I don't know if you follow this much. I went into this rabbit hole of around the placebo, the nocebo effect. Unbelievable what we're finding now, and we can dive into that. I don't want to blabber on too much, but wow, I mean, there was endless interesting pieces of research that we could discuss.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've been listening to this podcast called the Telepathy Tapes, and they talk a lot about placebo effect and like, is it actually the belief in something healing you? Is it the placebo? Is it that you're actually still tapping into something where your brain is more like an antenna rather than just like a solitary thing? I mean, there's so many interesting theories right now around the brain and placebo. So,
Yeah.
yeah, any
Yeah, let's
placebo studies that you found particularly interesting?
let's dive into what placebos can and can't do. Okay, so placebos don't heal sickness, they heal illness. Because sickness and illness are not the same thing. Sickness is in the body, illness is the perception of symptoms in the brain, right? All pain doesn't happen in the body. Pain happens here, right? It doesn't matter if it's in your arm or your leg or your back or whatever. All pain is interpreted in the brain. It's just information. So placebos are completely ineffective when it comes to healing. You can't cure cancer with placebos. You can't mend a broken arm with placebos. That is not how placebos work. And anybody telling you that's how it works, there's no scientific evidence showing that whatsoever. What we do know is that there's no magic around it, but that placebos can in fact change behavior, which then can lead to all kinds of biological changes. For example, one of the studies that blew my mind was around longevity. That we know that people who have positive views on aging, even starting at age 30, end up living on average 7.5 years longer. That is more than the effect of changing your diet, exercising, or quitting smoking. Isn't that incredible? Like, for all the effort that the Surgeon General tells us around, you need to stop smoking, exercise, stop eating bad food, all this effort, nobody ever tells you, hey, if you have a positive view of aging, you will live on average 7.5 years longer. Now, causation is not correlation. What's going on here? It's not that people are manifesting or vibrating or being one with the universe and changing their biology through the mind alone. That is not what's happening. It's that people who have positive views of aging have this behavioral cascade that keeps them physically and socially active. And so they do healthier behaviors. And so in a way, it starts from the belief, but that belief really does change your biology, and it makes it effortless. It's not, oh, I have to exercise. It's become something that they do every day. And so I think that's an example of how we can very quickly shift from what's called a limiting belief. A limiting belief is something that saps your motivation to a liberating belief. That's a term I kind of coined. A liberating belief is something that supplies motivation. So a limiting belief around aging would be that decline is inevitable, right? Which is not false. Right? There are cases where it's not true. In certain period, you could make a case for why that's not absolutely true. But that's what most people believe. I'm having a senior moment. My back is hurting. I'm getting old. I can't do this. I can't do that. Well, that leads to a negative spiral, a negative behavioral cascade. Whereas a liberating belief might be growth is possible at any age. Is that also true? Yes, it can also be true, which leads me to the big conclusion of my work over the past 6 years on this book, was that beliefs are not facts. Okay, a fact is an objective truth. The world is a sphere, much more than it is flat. That's a fact. It doesn't care what you think. Okay, that's an objective truth. On the other end of the spectrum is faith. Faith is a conviction that does not require evidence. What happens in the afterlife? Faith that God rewards the righteous. That's faith. It's no evidence is required. Beliefs are neither of those. Beliefs are in the middle. Beliefs are convictions that can be revised based on evidence. And so the big revelation for me and how it's changed my life is that now my beliefs are things that are tools, not truths. They're tools, not truths. I don't have to hold it to this super high bar that, placebos only work because they have biological changes in the body and it requires deception and all this stuff. You can actually adopt a belief simply for the fact that it is useful without the need to actually prove it true. right? I choose to
Mm.
believe that growth is possible at any age. That becomes my liberating belief, and so that's I think a very I think a very positive and healthy new perspective I've taken with all kinds of practices I never did before.
Yeah. What kind of beliefs do you think are common that we should challenge?
Where do we begin? Well, I mean, how controversial do you want to be? What's your
It's
controversy
your
scale?
book, it's your interview, however you want to answer it.
Wow. Well, I know I'm talking to practitioners here, and I think that, and I know a lot of practitioners will agree with me, some will not, but I think we are on the precipice of a pretty dangerous acceptance out there of over medicalizing things. I think in many ways we underdiagnose a lot of people who really need help, severe cases that don't get the help they need. But then in many other cases, we are over medicalizing what otherwise would have been normal behavior a few generations ago. And that's not so terrible were it not for the fact that for many folks, and it's not so much the people who get quality care, it's more these people who are diagnosing themselves on TikTok. I think that's really where the problem is. People self-diagnosing ADHD, they're self-diagnosing whatever, you name it, right? They're making
Oh
up
my gosh.
terms that aren't even diagnosed. They think that imposter syndrome is like a medical term.
Hmm.
And then what happens
Yeah.
every time they have a difficulty? Oh, that's my imposter syndrome. Well, when we
Yeah. And
when we
everyone's
create
ex
those
has a personality disorder. Like all the exes have
yes,
personality disorders.
thank you. Everybody was a narcissist, and that's when you're projecting on somebody else. But if it's onto yourself,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother level of dysfunction. And so in this chapter that I titled "Your Labels Are Your Limits," I detail all these nocebo effects. Starting with a very clear example is a beautiful example of there was a gentleman that's known in the literature as Mr. A, and he was 23 years old. He barges into an emergency room with a bottle of pills. He collapses on the floor, and the last thing that the nurse can hear him iterate before he passes out is, "I took all my pills. I took all my pills." Well, they put him on a gurney. They take his blood pressure. They start figuring out, taking his vitals. He has dangerously low blood pressure. He has a very low heartbeat, and all they know is that they have this pills with that has an undetermined medication on it, but it has a phone number. They call this phone number, the medical staff, and it turns out this guy was in a medical trial of antidepressants. And he took the pills thinking he wanted to die. He had a argument with his girlfriend, and he tried to commit suicide. Changed his mind the last minute after he had swallowed the pills. Got his friend to drive him to the hospital, and he was sure that he was about to die unless the doctors helped him. Well, the medical staff calls this number. Turns out he was in a medical trial for these depression this depression medication. But when they get on the phone with the clinic who prescribed the pills, they reveal to them, unbeknownst to Mr. A, that he was in the placebo group. They tell him, "Hey, buddy, you just took placebos. This was an inert substance." Within 15 minutes, all his physiological symptoms disappear. Normal heart rate, normal blood pressure. 15 minutes, he's back to baseline. So this tells us something, right? This tells us something very important about what happens when we start to internalize these labels. If something as like an inert substance, like a sugar pill, can create these physiological symptoms, what else can they do, right? What other possible nocebo type effects can we get from the labels that people might be self-diagnosing?
Man, so good. I feel like just thinking about just that physical reaction to sugar pills is just like what potential the human body has just based on what we think and we believe. It just is amazing. I mean, I
It
guess I'm
is.
thinking about a lot of people, and you've said this before, are kind of protected. Their beliefs are often protected by their environment. How do we redesign maybe our surroundings to support new beliefs, not just new habits? It's March at the time of this release. We're a couple months into the year. Most people's New Year's resolutions, statistically, they've given up on by this point.
Long gone.
So clearly, the habit forming isn't the only thing. But what can we do to design our environments to support the movement towards new beliefs?
Yeah. Well, I would back up a tiny bit and say before we design our environment, which can be very helpful, it's not always possible, right? It's not always
Mm.
possible to leave your friends, to leave, the bad influences in your life, to leave your home. It's not easy for a lot of people. I think one thing that we can all do is to be a little introspective and ask ourselves what we can do. And so it's exactly these areas. It's those New Year's resolutions that you mentioned that come up year after year after year. It's those unresolved conflicts in our lives, the relationships that don't get resolved, the dreams that are unfulfilled, that novel we wanted to write, the business we wanted to start, the weight we wanted to lose, whatever the case might be. Those things that keep coming up again and again, that's where the limiting beliefs are every time. And we all carry around these limiting beliefs. Doesn't matter how successful you are. I interviewed billionaires, I interviewed people who are broke. We all have these limiting beliefs. It's almost like your face, right? We all have a face.
Mm.
We carry it around with us all day long, but you can't see your face. The only way you can see your face is to look in the mirror. And so, what I'm trying to do, what this book attempts to do, is to give you a mirror to look at these beliefs that we don't examine. These very benign limiting beliefs, like I'm too old, I'm too fat, I'm too thin, I'm too late. That's a very common one. The
Mm.
world is awful. That's a very common one these days. We're convinced. We hold this belief. All kinds of these beliefs. That's my ADHD. I hear that all the time. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And I'm not here to argue what is the truth. I don't think that's actually the most important question. The most important question is it helpful? Is it helpful or is it harmful? Is it adaptive or maladaptive? And I think it's all right for us to sometimes say, you know what? In this fog where we don't have, for most of our life decisions, we don't have facts. Who am I going to marry? Where should I live? What job should I take? These aren't based on facts, they're based on beliefs. And so we need to get really good at constantly examining these beliefs and figuring out, do we have the right ones? Or are we imprisoning ourselves into this cage of identity, this cage of limitations based on these limiting beliefs?
I love your work, and this has been throughout all of your books, where you really focus on responsibility, but without the self-blame. And the
Mm,
self-blame that often turns into self-criticism.
mm.
I'm no good, like, and it goes into the beliefs, about ourselves. And I love that it's like, yeah, this is happening, but like, what is the impact on you? Talk a little bit more about how quickly our self-criticism, self-blame turns into a belief.
How quickly our self, but well, I think our beliefs, tend to originate from our life experience. These are called our priors, and this is another thing that blew my mind. That when there's this relatively new theory about how the brain works. We're still really in the Stone Age when it comes to how the brain really, really works. There's so much we don't understand. But it was interesting to me how, when I looked at the history of metaphors for the brain, how much it's evolved. And interestingly enough, it always is connected to the latest technology of the day. Have you noticed that? That
Mm, hmm.
we used to think that the brain operated like clockwork, and that when we, during the Industrial Revolution, and we talked about blowing off steam is still a term we use that came from Freud's day, that we had these repressed emotions that needed to come out somehow, and so this boiler analogy that we need to blow off steam, that comes from that generation. And then we thought that the brain was like a computer, right? During the information age, we thought that there was like processing going on. We know that that's not true. The brain is not making little mathematical computations the way your laptop does. And then, during the age of Dow Chemical, better living through chemistry, it was all about the chemical imbalance theory. That if we just fix your brain like we could mix chemicals in a test tube, then we would restore these balances. Now we know that's a woefully inadequate explanation of what's happening in the brain. The best we have today is what's called predictive processing. Processing says that we all live in a simulation, that we don't need to live in the matrix. You're already in the matrix, that the brain is completely incapable of absorbing reality. Reality is taking into your eyeballs, into your ears, into your skin cells, into your brain, 11 million bits of information per second. 11 million bits of information per second is the equivalent of reading War and Peace every second twice. Okay, tremendous amount of information. No way that our brains can take in and absorb all that information. What we can absorb, what the conscious mind can actually process, is only 50 bits of information. 50 bits. That's about a sentence a second. So compare that 50 bits to 11 million bits. That's 0.000045% of the information that's available to you. So the brain has to make these shortcuts. It has to use beliefs, our prior understanding, based, to answer your question, based on what happened to us in the past, in order to filter what is happening to us in the present. Which means we do not see reality. We see a prediction of reality, which also means that for all of us, reality is woefully distorted. You know, we know that people who are on a diet see food as physically larger. People who are afraid of heights see distances as farther. They literally think that distances, they perceive them differently. And the examples go on and on and on. There's, you know, we've probably seen these optical illusions where we can show an image to people from industrialized country. Will see the image completely different to a pre-industrialized country. One will see squares, the other will see circles. Incredible, same image. And the examples go on and on. And so this is all determined based on our prior beliefs, because again, our brain is projecting what it expects to see and makes it true, which is why, you know, that we like to say that seeing is believing. It's just as true that believing is seeing.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like this book and writing it was maybe more personal or philosophical. Like it was a bit more of that in how it's turned. Like, what belief of your own would you say that you've had to confront as a result of writing this book?
Oh, that definitely changed my perception of, we talked about aging. I've changed my practices around placebos. There was a beautiful study done by Ted Kaptchuk at Harvard, where he challenged this notion that placebos require deception. That we all believed, as of a few years ago, that placebos don't work unless you believe it's medicine. That's why we have double-blind control studies, right? That the patient, as well as the practitioner, nobody knows who's on the placebo treatment and who's on the real thing. Well, Kapchuk one day says, let's try something different. Let's tell people they're getting a placebo. And so what does he do? He has IBS patients, and we know that IBS is very responsive to the placebo effect, as is insomnia, as is ADHD, as is anxiety. Lots and lots of maladies are very receptive to placebos. IBS is particularly receptive. He brings in these patients. He tells them, this is a placebo. The bottle says placebo on it. In fact, you can buy bottles. They're now selling quite well on Amazon, these placebo pills. I think it might have been because of this study. He tells his patients, hey, this is a placebo. Here's what he says. He says, this is a placebo pill. It is an inert substance. However, it has been shown to reduce symptoms of IBS. That's all he says, okay? Turns out that these placebo pills were as effective as the leading treatment for pain, for the discomfort of IBS. In fact, so much so that patients reported coming back to him, when they went back to Kapchuk, this is what he told me, and saying, hey, Dr. Kapchuk, can I get some of those amazing placebo pills? They work so well. I mean, so now we ask what's changed in my life. Now I don't make fun of non-scientific treatments like I used to. I still make fun of them a little bit. But if something is you know, if something is not very expensive, if something is not dangerous for you, you know, taking that vitamin C when you feel a little bit sick, it's probably not doing anything, but the placebo effect is doing something. You know, and the list goes on and on and on. That we know that there was a study of men who were working out, and they gave them a pill that they said, this is a steroid. Really, it was a placebo. And the people who were given that placebo put on more muscle despite being on the same exact exercise regimen as the people who were in the control group. Now, it wasn't that their mind built muscle, it's that they worked harder. They actually, because they thought, oh, I'm on this super, you know, steroid pill, they got in 1 or 2 more reps. You know, they put on a little bit more weight. And so they actually worked harder. So there's, again, beliefs are tools, not truths. So I've relaxed that constraint of, you know, my very scientific brain of, I need to see the evidence that this really, really works for the reasons I think it does, and kind of relax the constraint and says, you know what? It's all right if I don't exactly know how it's working, because the placebo effect is amazing. I'll give you another quick example of what I've changed in my life. One of the cheapest things you can do that has incredible benefits, the ROI is off the charts, is prayer. I never used to pray. Well, I did when I was very, very young, but as an adult, I never prayed because I'm I'm part of the largest religious group in America. The largest religious group in America today are what we call nuns, people, not N-U-N, not the Catholic nuns, but N-O-N-E, the people who don't identify with any faith. And so I never prayed. And I think we have lost a lot because of this, because we've seen many studies now. The literature is pretty conclusive that people who pray have extraordinary benefits. They live longer, they're happier, they're more connected to their community. All kinds of benefits come from prayer. And we used to think that it was somehow connected to that faith. Well, now there are studies that show that even people who substitute God or the supernatural for meaningful terminology, Mother Earth or the universe or the sum of all forces, have many of the same protective benefits. So now I pray. And I stopped asking, is someone answering my prayers? Because I don't believe that there's a cosmic slot machine out there that gives me goodies. There's no like Santa Claus type God. I think that there is an effect where prayer, and this isn't original research, so this is research I cite in the book, that prayer can be a mechanism for solving problems. Think about it. You sit down, you articulate what you're struggling with, maybe you meditate on it for a bit and you formulate a plan. And then if you do it in a congregation of some sort, there's probably people around who can help you with that. Right? So if you're praying for love, maybe somebody down the pew is also looking for love. Maybe if you're looking for new clients for your business, maybe there's somebody who can help you with that. So there is a lot of benefits to these practices that I kind of threw away as silly fictions.
Yeah, it's amazing as you look into some of that placebo research and then kind of thinking through, well, why could that be working? My favorite one recently that I read was this Reiki placebo. So they had genuine Reiki practitioners. Then they taught the team how to do Reiki, and so they called that Fakie. And because they did the same things, but they weren't trained practitioners. And then they had a group that was dealing with pain that just like didn't get anything. And it was all around like pain reduction, and I think people had like bad backs or shoulders or whatever. And the group that did the best were those that got Reiki from the Reiki practitioner. But like barely below it, like 10% less was the Fakie. And so it's like just the
Yeah.
act of having another human put their hands over you and send good intentions, good vibes, however you describe it, had some effect, and I think it's
A
it's
huge effect.
interesting to
Yeah.
just say
Yeah.
what happens when we start saying, okay, this is working in some way, and we don't know how, we don't know why. We can hypothesize and maybe eventually know why, but there is something there, and I think that's really important to address those beliefs.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
awesome. The last question that I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I think it's the same advice I give everybody, that you are more powerful than you know. That we limit ourselves with these false beliefs, and we don't examine them, we don't take them out and take a look at them and figure out which ones do we keep and which ones do we toss away, because that's the nature of these limiting beliefs. We are convinced that they are true. So the message I would want to leave with everyone is that you are far more powerful than you think you are.
So awesome. Near, your book comes out next week, March 17th, if I remember correctly. Is that
10th,
right?
March 10th.
March 10th. March 10th, it comes out. Beyond Beliefs, the book. Where can they find it, and where else can they find you?
Absolutely. So if you go to my website, nearandfar.com, near is spelled like my first name. So that's N-I-R and far.com. And if you go to my website, actually, we have this 30-page belief transformation journal that you can use yourself. You can use with your clients. I want it to benefit as many people as possible. It's totally free. We couldn't fit it in the book, so we decided to give it on the website. All you have to do is go to nearandfar.com. And there's actually, I'll give you the full URL. It's nearandfar.com, near spelled like my first name, N-I-R. And that's /beyond dash belief, beyond dash belief.
Awesome. Well, go grab the book. Near, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Next time you write a book, we'd love to have you on again.